It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed to slip away, leaving Sarah alone with the soft hum of her air conditioner and the flickering glow of the television. The house was peaceful, just as she liked it, her own little sanctuary. She had recently moved into this suburban neighborhood, hoping for some tranquility after years of city noise. But tonight, something felt different. A sudden, sharp knock at the door shattered the stillness, the sound cutting through the silence like a jolt of electricity. Sarah jumped, her heart racing, as she instinctively glanced at the clock. It was almost 10:30 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? She stood frozen for a moment, unsure, then forced herself to take a deep breath before walking to the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw two men standing on her doorstep. Both were dressed in plain dark clothes, their faces serious and unreadable. One of them held a clipboard, and the other stood with his arms crossed, watching her door with unsettling intensity. Her mind raced, but she opened the door anyway. "Yes?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the unease that crept up her spine. The man holding the clipboard spoke first. His voice was deep and calm, but there was an edge to it that made her instinctively step back. "Good evening. We're with the Homeowners Association," he said, flashing a badge that looked official but wasn't quite right. "We'd received several complaints regarding noise disturbances coming from your residents, specifically loud music and late-night sounds." Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned. "Noise? I haven't been playing any loud music or having parties," she replied, her voice tinged with confusion. "Are you sure you have the right house?" The second man stepped forward, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, as if trying to gauge her reaction. His cold stare made her feel like she was under a microscope. "Noise complaints don't always have to be from music," he said, his tone detached. "It could be anything. Talking, movement, general disturbances. We've been asked to ensure the peace of the neighborhood is maintained." Sarah was still taken aback. She hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, and her neighbors had always seemed friendly. Was this some kind of prank? "Look, I haven't had any complaints. I work late sometimes, but—" she started, but the first man cut her off, his demeanor shifting, becoming more insistent. "We're not here to argue," he interrupted, glancing at the clipboard again. "We're simply doing our job. If the noise continues, we'll have to take further action. For now, we suggest you keep things down." He turned to leave, but then hesitated. With a slow, deliberate motion, he glanced at her again, his gaze lingering for just a second too long. "We'll be checking in again soon," he added cryptically before both men turned and walked away without another word. As Sarah closed the door, she felt a chill creep down her spine. Something about the encounter didn't sit right with her. The way they had looked at her, the strange urgency in their voices, it felt wrong. These men weren't like any HOA enforcers she had heard of. And why did they act like they had more on their minds than just a noise complaint? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, like her every move was under scrutiny. Shaking off the uneasy thought, Sarah tried to return to her evening, but the image of their cold eyes and the sense of something sinister lingering in the air stayed with her long after they had left. Something was off, and she had a feeling that this strange visit was only the beginning. The night passed without incident, but Sarah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling the visit had left behind. It was like a shadow had fallen over her once peaceful home, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. The next morning, she brewed her coffee and sat by the window, watching the usual morning bustle of the neighborhood. But today, the streets felt strangely quiet, like the air was thick with tension, and every car that passed seemed to carry a weight of uncertainty. She tried to push the nagging thoughts aside. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe the men really were from the HOA, just doing their job. But something about them didn't fit the usual mold of neighborhood enforcers. They didn't act like professionals. Their presence felt calculated, almost too controlled. Deciding to get to the bottom of it, Sarah grabbed her phone and called the HOA office. She was met with the usual hold music, the sterile voice offering polite greetings. When a representative finally picked up, Sarah introduced herself and asked about the complaint. "Hi, I was visited last night by two men who claimed to be with the HOA," she said, trying to sound casual. "They said they were responding to noise complaints against my house. But when I checked, there were no records of any complaints. Is this some kind of mistake?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by a soft rustle of papers. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't find any such complaint or report regarding your address. Our records show no noise violations in the area for the past several months." Sarah's eyebrows knitted together. "So, these men weren't from the HOA?" "That's correct," the representative confirmed. "We don't have any officers who go door to door like that. It sounds like you may have been approached by individuals posing as HOA officials. I'd advise you to report this to the authorities." Sarah hung up, her heart hammering in her chest. Something was definitely wrong. These men had lied to her. And now she wasn't sure if they were just trying to intimidate her, or if there was something more to it. The idea that someone might be pretending to be a part of the HOA wasn't just unsettling. It was downright dangerous. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from her neighbor, Mark. "Hey, did those guys come by your place last night too? I thought I heard them talking outside. They weren't wearing any uniforms or anything, and they seemed off." Sarah's stomach dropped. Mark, a longtime resident, had always been the type to keep an eye on the neighborhood. If he had noticed them too, then it wasn't just her imagination. She quickly typed back, "Yes, I had a visit from them. They said they were from the HOA. But when I called the office, they denied it. Something's not right about this. Have you seen anything unusual lately?" Within seconds, Mark replied, "Actually, now that you mention it, I've seen some strange people lurking around lately. They don't seem to belong here. And they've been watching the houses at night. Keep an eye out, Sarah. I'll check in with you later." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she put down her phone. She looked out the window again, her gaze scanning the familiar street, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. The cars, the joggers, the kids playing in front yards. It all seemed like another quiet day in the neighborhood. But Sarah's instincts were screaming at her. Something was happening, something that no one could see. Suddenly, a figure caught her eye. A man, standing just outside the house across the street, was staring directly at her window. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the intent in his gaze. It wasn't a casual glance. It was as if he had been waiting for her to notice. Her pulse quickened. Had they been watching her all along? Without thinking, she ducked out of sight, her heart pounding in her chest. The man didn't move, didn't break his stare. He was still watching. A creeping dread slithered through Sarah's mind. What had she just stumbled into? Sarah stayed hidden behind the curtain, her breath shallow, watching as the man across the street remained motionless. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging into eternity. Her mind raced. Who was he? And why had he been staring at her house like that? Every instinct screamed at her to stay out of sight, to retreat, but something inside her pushed her forward. She couldn't just sit back and wait to become another pawn in whatever twisted game was unfolding. She waited, holding her breath, until the man finally turned and walked away, his steps deliberate and measured. As soon as he was out of sight, Sarah exhaled, her chest tightening in the aftermath of the tension. But even as the adrenaline faded, one thought lingered in her mind. This was no coincidence. The strange visit from the fake HOA enforcers, the odd behavior of the man, and the disappearance of her neighbor, everything was connected. She quickly grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Mark. She needed to talk to Mark. But the message she'd gotten from him earlier had been brief. Was he in danger too? Was this more than just some neighborhood scam? Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a new message notification from him. "I think I know what's going on. I've been watching the same guys for days now. They're not who they say they are. I don't trust them. Be careful, Sarah. Meet me tonight at the old storage facility by the woods. It's the only place they won't be watching. I'll explain everything." The chill running down her spine turned into a cold, sickening knot. The old storage facility. She hadn't been there in years. It was an abandoned building on the edge of town, isolated and rarely visited by anyone. Mark's message made her feel like she was walking straight into the heart of something dangerous, something no one had warned her about. Sarah had no choice but to go. She needed answers, and Mark was the only one who seemed to know something. But as she read the message again, a feeling of unease crept in. Mark's sudden urgency, his cryptic warning, felt off. Had he really been watching these men, or had he known about them all along? Was he a part of whatever secret was unfolding, or was he trying to protect her from something far darker? The questions piled up, each one more pressing than the last. But there was no time to analyze it all. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Her phone buzzed again. It was a notification from a local news outlet, an alert that made her heart stop. Authorities investigating unusual activities in suburban neighborhood. Reports of strange visitors and covert surveillance have been linked to a potential undercover government operation. Her hand shook as she read the words. Undercover operation. Were the men from last night connected to this investigation? Was she tangled in the web of a government agency, unknowingly being watched for far longer than she'd realized? The news story mentioned several nearby areas under investigation, including hers. Sarah's stomach churned. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. If she was right, she wasn't just being watched. She was part of something huge, something dangerous. She had no more time to lose. The decision was made. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her heart pounding with every step. The old storage facility was on the edge of town, far enough from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. The perfect place to meet Mark, if he was telling the truth. But deep down, a part of her wondered, was he truly a friend, or was he part of the scheme all along? The night air was thick with tension as Sarah pulled her car into the narrow, overgrown parking lot of the old storage facility. The faint glow of the streetlights barely illuminated the rusted metal doors and crumbling brick walls that loomed ahead of her. She could feel the weight of the place, its abandonment pressing down on her chest. Everything about this moment felt wrong, like stepping into the mouth of a trap. Her heart pounded in her ears as she shut off the engine. The area was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic from the highway miles away. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on the gravel. The only sound was the breeze rustling through the trees that surrounded the facility. She glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out at her from the shadows. But the only thing she saw was the broken, faded sign hanging crookedly from a nearby fence. Storage units, authorized personnel only. Was she the authorized personnel now? The thought made her stomach turn. Mark's text had said to meet him here, but there was no sign of him yet. The silence hung heavy, thick with an unsettling stillness. She hugged her coat tighter around her, wishing she had brought a flashlight. The only light came from the dim glow of the street lamps, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. Her footsteps echoed as she walked deeper into the facility, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Where was Mark? A rustling sound came from behind her, making her freeze in place. Sarah turned sharply, her eyes scanning the darkness. A shadow darted across her field of vision, just out of reach of the light. It was too fast to be a person, more like an animal or someone trying to stay out of view, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. She took a few steps backward, her pulse quickening. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Sarah." She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat. Mark stepped out from behind a stack of rusted metal crates, his face partially obscured by the darkness. He looked disheveled, eyes wide with fear. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker, a sense of urgency and fear she hadn't seen before. "Mark," she whispered, moving toward him quickly. "What's going on? What did you mean in your message? What's happening here?" He glanced around nervously before grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a shadowed corner of the facility. "They're watching," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "The men you saw. They're not just some rogue agents or scam artists. They're part of a covert government operation, and it's not just us they're after. It's this whole neighborhood." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What? Why? Why me?" "I don't know everything," Mark replied, his voice trembling slightly. "But I've been tracking them for weeks. They're not who they say they are. They're using the HOA as a cover, but they're really looking for something. Or someone." "Someone?" Sarah's voice cracked with fear. "What do you mean?" Before Mark could answer, a sharp, cold voice cut through the air. "You shouldn't have come here." Sarah froze. Her eyes darted around the darkness, and there, standing at the entrance of the facility, were two men. The same two men who had visited her house the night before. One of them stepped forward, his features illuminated by the pale light of the street lamp. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were cold, calculating. The clipboard in his hand was now replaced by a gun, casually held at his side, but the implication was clear. "You've been asking too many questions, Sarah," the man said, his voice low and threatening. "And now you're involved in something much bigger than you can understand." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She looked at Mark, but his face was pale, his body tense. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We don't want anything from you, but you've seen too much, and now you're a liability." Mark moved, his hand twitching at his side. "No, you don't understand," he said, his voice rising with panic. "I'm trying to stop this. Stop you, before it gets worse." The man's smile faded, and in that instant, Sarah knew it wasn't just her life at risk. The weight of everything that had happened, the fake HOA, the strange surveillance, the hidden messages, was closing in on her. The trap had snapped shut. The man with the gun didn't move, his eyes fixed on Sarah with chilling intensity. The air between them felt charged, like an impending storm, each second stretching on painfully. Mark's hand hovered at his side, where Sarah knew he kept a concealed weapon, but there was no way they were getting out of this without a confrontation. "You don't have to do this," Mark said, his voice strained but defiant. "You don't know what you're messing with. We're not your enemies." The man didn't flinch, his lips twisted into a cold smile, but the gun never wavered. "We know exactly what we're dealing with. And so do you now. You both should have stayed out of this, but now it's too late." Sarah's pulse raced as her mind scrambled to process the unfolding situation. She glanced at Mark, his face tight with fear, but there was something else in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Was he really on her side, or had he known more than he had let on? "We didn't ask for this," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "You're not just some HOA goons. What do you want with us? What's really going on?" The man paused for a moment, the briefest flicker of hesitation crossing his face. Then, without warning, he gestured to his partner, who stepped forward, opening a black briefcase that had been tucked under his arm. He pulled out a thick folder, its edges frayed as if it had been handled hundreds of times. Slowly, he slid it across the ground toward Sarah. "Take a look," the man said, his voice cold. "Maybe it'll make things clearer." Sarah hesitated, her fingers brushing against the edge of the folder. Inside were pages filled with names, photos, and cryptic notes. Her eyes scanned the pages, heart hammering in her chest. The people listed were local residents, neighbors, some she had known for years. The strange thing was the way they were marked. Targets. "Your father," the man added, watching Sarah closely. "He's one of them. We've been tracking him for years." Her breath caught in her throat. Her father. The man who had walked out of her life when she was just a child. She hadn't thought about him in years, not since his sudden disappearance. But the folder showed his photo, his real name, marked with a large red X. "No, that can't be true," Sarah whispered, her head spinning. "My father's Dead. He left when I was a kid. The man's gaze hardened. That's what we want you to believe. But he's been running a covert operation of his own for decades. He's been working with a criminal syndicate, right under your nose. We think he's the mastermind behind everything that's been happening in this neighborhood. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mind spun in a blur as she looked down at the photo of her father, a younger version of the man she remembered, but now distorted in a way that felt almost unrecognizable. "Why would you bring this to me?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice even. "What do you want from me? Why involve me in this?" The man's expression softened, though it wasn't comforting. "Because you're the only one who can help us bring him down. You're the one who can lead us to him." Sarah's thoughts collided like a thunderstorm. Her father, the man who had disappeared without a trace, was a criminal mastermind. The very same man whose shadow had loomed over her entire life, without her even knowing. The truth was like ice running through her veins, cold and suffocating. Mark stepped forward, his hand gripping her arm. "You don't have to do this," he urged, his voice desperate. "This isn't your fight. Let us handle it." But the man with the gun shook his head. "You're already involved, whether you like it or not. If you don't help us, we'll make sure your life becomes a lot more complicated than you can imagine." The threat hung in the air like a promise, and Sarah felt the weight of it. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was part of the story, a piece in a dangerous game she had no control over. And the worst part, her father was the one pulling the strings. The room seemed to close in on her. She had never felt so trapped, so powerless. There was no way out, not without making a choice she wasn't ready for. But the deeper question gnawed at her. If her father was truly involved in this, could she trust Mark? Could she trust anyone at all? The weight of the folder in Sarah's hands felt unbearable, as though the truth contained within those pages was a physical burden she couldn't escape. She stared at the photo of her father, the man who had abandoned her, only to find that his absence was the tip of a much darker iceberg. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her whole life, the years she had spent wondering about him, were all a lie. And worse, now she was tangled in the very mess he had created. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath quickened as she glanced between the two men with the guns and Mark. Mark. He had always been there for her, always offered support and guidance. But now, with this truth crashing down on her, she couldn't shake the suspicion that maybe, just maybe, he had known more than he had let on. "You're not telling me everything, are you, Mark?" Sarah's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "How much did you know about all of this? About my father?" Mark's face faltered for a moment. It was subtle, but Sarah noticed it. His eyes flickered away, his jaw tightening. She felt a wave of betrayal wash over her, but she needed answers. Had Mark been lying to her all along? Mark began, but the man with the gun interrupted, his tone flat and commanding. "That's enough questions for now," the man said. "The truth is, we've been watching you both. We know everything about your lives, and we've waited long enough to make our move." The coldness in his voice made Sarah's blood run cold. She looked back down at the folder, her fingers trembling as she turned the page. The more she saw, the more she realized just how deep this went. It wasn't just her father involved in this covert operation. It was the entire neighborhood, a network of people who were being used, watched, and controlled by forces she couldn't even begin to understand. And now she was caught in the web. Mark took a deep breath, stepping closer to Sarah. "Listen, I didn't want to bring you into this. I didn't want you to find out like this." His voice cracked, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected: guilt. "I've been trying to stop this from the inside, but you're right. I should have told you sooner. Your father was part of something much bigger than I realized, but he's not the mastermind. There's a whole network, and they're using people like us to cover their tracks." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who are they? Why are they after me? What do they want? The man with the gun smirked, leaning in. They don't just want you, Sarah. They want your bloodline. Your father was a key figure in their operation. And you. He paused, locking eyes with her. You're the missing piece. You're the one who can help us finish what he started. The words hit her like a freight train. Her bloodline. That was what it all came down to. Her very existence. It wasn't just a matter of catching a criminal or stopping a network of corrupt officials. This was personal, and she was at the center of it. She stood frozen for a moment, processing the horror of it all. Her mind scrambled for a way out, but there was no escape. Not now. She had been caught, dragged into something she didn't understand. And now, there was no way to walk away. They had her exactly where they wanted her. Mark stepped forward again, this time with more urgency. You don't have to be a part of this, Sarah. You don't have to help them. We can get you out of here. We can protect you. But you have to trust me. The cold man's laugh cut through the tension. Protection. You think you can protect her? She's already in too deep. No one can save her now. Mark's hand twitched again, and Sarah caught a glimpse of a small, hidden device strapped to his wrist. A tracking chip, or maybe something worse. Was Mark really trying to protect her, or was he part of the plan all along? Doubt twisted in Sarah's gut. The man had been right. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't even known existed, and everyone around her might be a player, including Mark. The reality of her situation came crashing down. She wasn't just caught in a covert operation. She was a part of it, a key figure in a game of espionage and manipulation that she had no hope of understanding. And no matter what Mark said, there was no turning back. Her hand gripped the folder tightly, her fingers itching to turn another page, to learn more. But it was too late for knowledge. It was time for action. Her next move would decide everything. And for the first time, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Mark. The cold man's words echoed in Sarah's ears as she stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. She was caught, trapped in a web of lies and deceit, and every direction she turned seemed to close in on her. Mark's desperate pleas, the mysterious men, her father's betrayal, and now the chilling reality that she was the center of it all. It felt like her world was slipping through her fingers. She glanced at Mark, his face a mask of desperation. His eyes, pleading with her to trust him, made something in her gut twist. She didn't know if it was fear or something darker, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had told her might have been part of the trap. Her father's name, the cryptic messages, the file, it was all tied together in a way she couldn't comprehend. And in the middle of it, she was left to make a choice that would decide her fate. The man with the gun took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. Time's up. You can't run from this, Sarah. You have to decide. Help us or suffer the consequences. You're not leaving here until you make up your mind. A shiver ran down her spine. The air between them crackled with tension, like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Her heart hammered in her chest as she weighed her options. Escape wasn't an option. She knew it. There were too many of them, and they were too well prepared. Mark. Sarah's voice cracked. What if this is all a lie? What if they've been manipulating us the entire time? Mark's face paled, but his eyes never left hers. I swear to you, Sarah, I'm not a part of this. I'm trying to stop it. But we don't have much time. If we don't act now, we're both going to end up just like everyone else in that file. They'll disappear us, just like they did with your father. The cold man chuckled darkly. Your father was a problem, but he's not the only one. You think we're letting you walk away? No, Sarah. You belong to us now, whether you like it or not. Sarah's fingers clenched around the folder, and for a brief, terrifying moment, her mind seemed to go blank. The reality of it all was too much to take in. She could feel the walls closing in, her breath shallow and rapid as the panic set in. Her father had been a part of something monstrous, and now so was she. There was no going back from this. Mark's voice broke through her panic, low and urgent. "Sarah, please, this isn't who we are. Let me help you." But Sarah wasn't sure if she could trust him. How could she, when everything she thought she knew was being torn apart? Mark had been so close to this world for so long. How did she know he wasn't lying to her now? How did she know his motivations weren't tangled up in the same web that had ensnared her father? The man's voice cut through her swirling thoughts. "Enough. I'm giving you one last chance. Help us, and we'll let you live. Refuse, and we'll make sure you regret it." The cold weight of the gun in his hand seemed to pierce the air, a constant reminder of how dangerous this situation was. Sarah felt herself shaking, but her mind was racing. She had to make a choice. She couldn't let them control her. Not anymore. Then something strange happened. As if on instinct, she dropped the folder and took a step back. She felt a sudden surge of clarity, like something deep within her clicked into place. There was more to this story, something she hadn't seen yet. She wasn't just some helpless pawn in this twisted game. Her father's legacy, her bloodline. It wasn't just a curse. It was a weapon. And now, it was hers to wield. Without thinking, she turned to Mark. "We need to move. Now." His eyes widened, and for a split second, he looked uncertain. But Sarah didn't wait. She bolted toward the nearest exit, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard the sound of footsteps. Running, chasing, but she didn't stop. There was no more hesitation. She didn't know how she would escape, or what the truth really was, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to be anyone's puppet. As she reached the back door, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. Mark was still there, but his face was unreadable. She couldn't afford to trust him completely. Not yet. Not until she had the answers. She pushed through the door and into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. But the fear inside her was even colder. The trap had closed, but this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And Sarah wasn't about to go down without a fight. The night air hit Sarah like a slap in the face as she sprinted into the alleyway behind the storage facility. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of fear and urgency. She didn't know where she was running, only that she couldn't stay there, not with the two men hot on her heels, and not with the weight of the folder, the truth, pressing against her mind like a vice. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, her shoes skidding on the slick pavement as she veered around a corner, heart racing. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to waste even a second. Every footstep behind her felt like it was getting closer, the sound of her pursuers echoing in the darkness like the hounds of hell closing in on their prey. She rounded another corner, her thoughts in a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. She couldn't run forever. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Her father, the name that had always been a ghost in her past, was the key to all of this. He had been involved in something massive, something dangerous. And now she was in it too. But why? What did they want from her? She pressed herself against the cool brick wall of an old building, forcing herself to slow her breathing, to steady her pulse. She could hear the men's voices now, low, but with the unmistakable edge of frustration. "Spread out," one of them barked. "She can't have gone far." She swallowed hard, her thoughts spinning as she scanned her surroundings. There was no escape, not unless she took drastic measures. And then, like a sudden flash of clarity, it hit her. The file. The notes, the pictures. Her father's face had been circled with a red X, the same mark that now haunted her thoughts. But there was one name at the bottom of the page that had been underlined, its meaning so cryptic it almost slipped past her in the chaos. Project Gemini. She remembered reading those words in the file, but it hadn't clicked until now. She wasn't just part of a network. She wasn't just the missing piece to some twisted game. She was the final piece to a larger plan. And if she didn't act fast, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was everyone's. Her father hadn't disappeared. He hadn't gone rogue. He had been silenced. And now it was up to Sarah to finish what he had started. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were getting closer. Sarah's eyes darted to a rusted metal door next to her. It was half open. Her heart raced as she made her decision. There was no turning back now. She slipped through the door, moving quickly but carefully. The inside was dark, filled with the smell of old wood and dust. It was an abandoned warehouse, the perfect hiding place. But only for a moment. Her fingers grazed the walls, looking for something, anything, that could help. And that's when she found it. A narrow staircase, leading up to what looked like a loft area. With no time to think, she rushed up the steps, her mind racing. At the top, she found herself in a small, dimly lit room filled with crates. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the air smelled stale, but she didn't care. The room felt safe, at least for now. She crouched behind a stack of crates, her breath coming in shaky gasps. The footsteps outside were now almost directly below her. She was trapped. The men were closing in. She had to act fast. But as she sat there, a horrifying thought gripped her. What if this was all part of the plan? What if they were just waiting for her to make a mistake? Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Trembling, she pulled it out and saw a message from Mark. Get to the rendezvous point. Now. Trust no one else. They're onto you. Her pulse spiked. The desperation in Mark's words was enough to make her stomach churn. Had he truly been trying to protect her, or had he been playing both sides? But there was no time for second-guessing. The door creaked open beneath her. She could hear them entering the building, their voices low, commanding. They were getting closer to the stairwell. Her heart hammered in her chest. There was only one way out. Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to be their pawn any longer. She wasn't going to be anyone's tool. The time for hiding was over. The game had changed. Now, it was time to take control. With a final glance of the phone, she slipped into the shadows, the weight of the file burning in her hand, ready to confront whatever came next. No one would control her. Not her father. Not the men chasing her. No one.